Hello humans, and welcome. I'm Rock99 and today I'm here for you with my Metal Gear franchise review, at last. It took me a lot for this one. I started researching on October last year and I'm still finding out stuff, but I think I prepared myself well enough and so we're finally here. First thing I like to say is that I'm really thankful to all of you who came to my streams and watched my videos as I was playing the Metal Gear games to make this review. I had a lot of fun, and it's definitely better than do all the research by myself as I used to. I'm looking forward to analyze more franchises and games with you in the future. I already have so many games and media I want to review, and with everything they keep releasing, we can potentially go on forever on this channel. Something I have to say before starting is that although I call this a franchise review, for these videos I decided to focus on the Metal Gear video games that are considered canon by most, which are also the ones I played during my live stream and that I made videos about. Made exception for Portable Ops, which I ended up playing by myself. I'll do make some references to the other media of the franchise though, as some need to be mentioned for a reason or another, and just because I like to share, this is how I personally like to think the Metal Gear universe. Anyway, there is already so much about Metal Gear here on the internet that it has been hard to write down a script that didn't repeat the same things that had already been told over and over again. So for the first two parts of my review, I decided to not really talk about the canon lore, but I want to focus instead on those that are the limits these games had to face during their development, and on how these limits affected them. Because while all the games at the end of the day are undeniably enjoyable to play and present brilliant gameplays that in a way or another covered up or exploited these limits, as you play you can't help but feel them. I did not include Metal Gear Rising in this section though, because as I mentioned already, it earned a video entirely dedicated to itself, and trust me if I say that is not a good thing. But in any case, that's enough for the intro and let's start already. The Metal Gear franchise began in 1987 with its first entry, Metal Gear, designed and directed by Hideo Kojima and released for the MSX computer system by Konami. It is considered the game that gave birth to the stealth genre in video games, but the stealth gameplay was a result of the hardware limitations that led Kojima to structure a gameplay more focused on stealth and exploration rather than on combat. Very unusual, especially for a war-themed game, but its success was also due to the brilliant construction of a narrative that perfectly matched this new type of gameplay. Indeed, you are the Special Forces agent Solid Snake, and its mission is to infiltrate the military base Outer Heaven to accomplish the mission objectives without being detected. So the difficulties the player could have faced with the limited MSX combat system were used to reinforce this concept and were brilliantly turned into a narrative device. It's known that Kojima took inspiration by Action American movies for this, but the system were still not able to recreate the same cinematographic experience, and this is true also for the official sequel, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. Despite it featuring new enhanced graphic and mechanics, an Hollywood-style intro, and despite it went beyond the simplistic black and white view of the world to explore a more grey area. Metal Gear 2, though, needs to be praised for being the one that established the Metal Gear iconic recurring elements, by bringing back from the original the 4-dimension breaking, the cardboard box, the weird bosses with superpowers, and by introducing the radar to keep an eye on the enemies. But to truly engrave the Metal Gear title in gaming history while also expressing the incredible narrative potential of video games was the third canonical entry of the franchise, Metal Gear Solid, released in 1998 for the new home console PlayStation. Thanks to PlayStation's ability to read the CD-ROM's discs, which allowed it to include longer and more elaborate soundtracks and cutscenes, Metal Gear Solid showcased a complex and intriguing story, full of interesting developments intertwined with real historical events and deep reflections of the themes of war, the threat of nuclear power, and the concept of replicating genes. It all while offering the player an improved stealth gameplay. The significant gaming experience was so created by the combination of American screen directory, themes and settings, like in the previous Metal Gear games, Japanese narrative elements such as no matter how strong the protagonist might be, they will always need the support of other characters for them to succeed in any situation, and the new visuals and mechanics made possible by the new home console. We've already seen with Metal Gear how the hardware was fully exploited to create the gaming experience, but I think that nothing will ever be comparable to Psycho Mantis' boss fight. where you had to change the controller ports to be able to defeat him. I had to experience myself practically how much it is nearly impossible to recreate the same experience as technology changes and advances.
They preserved the idea, but not really the player's experience.
However, for as much as the game gets as close as possible to resemble a movie, the graphics of those times were still far from fully recreated expressions and performances of actors, and that's why it was brilliant to use the codec for the majority of the dialogues, where characters appeared in semi-animated illustration with which the characters could express the emotions their polygon faces couldn't express on their own. However, the screen directing, the lighting, the soundtrack, and the amazing performance of the voice actors, both in the English and in the Japanese versions, work together to bring the game cutscenes as close as possible to a cinematographic experience. And I think Snake's confrontation with Liquid after the boss fight with Metal Gear Rex is a great example of this. Some argue that Metal Gear Solid is a remake of Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, as some environments, events, and characters are basically the same, but I came down to the conclusion that the game's recurring formula fits perfectly the franchise's main theme regarding the absurd and endless cycle that is war. I talk about formula because the games released before and after Metal Gear Solid have the same narrative and gameplay structure, although some may have some differences. But basically, in every game, a Snake starts an infiltrating mission, faces a team of soldiers with superpowers and abilities, and finally destroys a Metal Gear or a weapon capable to represent a threat for the entire world. It might look repetitive, but it is also important to remember that in big franchises, coherence is the base of success, alongside constant improvement, of course. It was in 2001 with Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty for the new console PlayStation 2 when characters started to be more expressive, thanks to the new graphics that allowed more detailed 3D models. The gameplay too was enhanced and the mechanics brought back from Metal Gear Solid were reintroduced with changes that aimed to make stealth experience more realistic and immersive. Now players could pick around corners, hide in lockers, and hang from edges. But with the players given new abilities to sneak around, the AI too was enhanced to be more challenging, with enemy soldiers patrolling and responding to situations like real soldiers would. Meanwhile, on the narrative side, the game is structured and follows the events of Metal Gear Solid's story, but it makes them experience from the newly introduced character of Raiden, to make the player not only see Solid Snake from a new, more external perspective, but to effectively deliver a message about the dangers of a society influenced too much by media, and how easy it can be to manipulate people's beliefs, behavior, and even culture through them. It is mind-blowing to realize that the game itself also warns you about how even video games can change a player's perception of a theme such as war.
War is a video game. What better way to raise the ultimate soldier?
And proves its point by making them experience themselves through Raiden how at the end of it all, the players are the ones who are ultimately manipulated. It's a complicated concept that game designers have to keep in mind, mostly because it is crucial to make the players feel free while limiting the actions that they can do, so they won't end up breaking the game. But Metal Gear Solid 2 uses this concept to put the player and Raiden on the same level, to compare their situations and connect them. And this connection is stressed a lot through the entire gameplay. An example of this is Raiden repeating that he trained with the VR missions before the events of Metal Gear Solid 2, exactly like the player did with the VR missions included in Metal Gear Solid Intro. These are particularly interesting because they appeared as only an extra for Metal Gear Solid, but here not only they are used as a tool to connect the player with Raiden, but they are also used to directly connect Metal Gear Solid with Sons of Liberty, making the experience the player had with those missions canon in the franchise lore. Even the digital graphic novel for Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden is introduced in Snake's clothes as he is indeed training in the VR missions. It is crazy to think of how many levels of meaning Raiden's character carries by himself, and the entire game has details like this to deliver effectively the message. Everything is so deepened and detailed that the game proved itself ahead of the times, so much that today, 23 years later, it can be considered very contemporary. Some say that the game has even been prophetic, considering how media influences our lives now. But despite all of this, There has been a limit that influenced the game in a way that led not only to some changes in the game's script during development, but also to the exclusion of a particular scenario for its ending. The limit wasn't represented by the hardware or the software restrictions, but instead by the time. Indeed, because the unfortunate events of 9/11 happened during the game's development, the scene that showcased Arsenal Gear's crash on Manhattan was totally removed. And I have to admit that before seeing the 3D model showed in the documentary, it has been very hard for me to clearly picture the Manhattan incident. Also because it didn't seem to me that those NPCs were panicking that much. However, I totally understand the decision to not include that scene in the game. It shows great sensitivity from the developers, and incredibly enough, the decision to cut that particular scene is still coherent with the game message. But if in Sons of Liberty's case the limit was external, for the development of the next canonical entry of the franchise, the limits were once again represented by the hardware. Indeed, in 2004, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater was released for PlayStation 2, despite it was supposed to be developed for PlayStation 3. It had to be brought back on the PlayStation 2 system because the new console took too much time to be released. However, Kojima wanted the game to bring a new gameplay experience, as for the first time the game would have been a prequel, and it was focused on the character that was the start of it all, Naked Snake, aka Big Boss. I'd like to point out how interesting it is to think that every one of the three playable protagonists of the franchise brought a different way of playing with them. Solid Snake gave us the basic of stealth games, then Raiden, after those bases were forced on him, at the end has his own different combat style, and then with Big Boss we got yet another kind of gameplay. And I have to admit that for as much as Solid Snake is my favorite character, I enjoyed playing as Big Boss more. Anyway, because the gaming experience had to be different, but they couldn't have the new console at their disposal, the development team brought the PlayStation 2 to its full potential. For the first time, the setting was mostly an outdoor jungle-like environment, and this led to a whole new set of mechanics focused on survival, so the player not only had to avoid being detected by enemies, but they also had to keep an eye on Snake's physical conditions. Avoiding to treat wounds or forgetting to feed Snake will directly affect his performances, and the local plants and animals too could represent a threat. However, in contrast to the countless options that this gameplay offered, allowing the player to play in the way they best suit them, and making each playthrough different from the previous one, the locations where all of this takes place ended up being very small. Although the player can move freely between areas and is incentivized to explore and exploit the surroundings, given everything that the mechanics allow you to do, the environment feels limited. In many occasions I couldn't help but notice how small was the map. I was honestly holding myself back during my live streams. But just for you to know, while I was playing Snake Eater, my brain was constantly like, the map is smaller than it looks, the map is smaller than it looks, the map is smaller than it looks. But for those who can experience something without overanalyzing everything like me, the game actually camouflaged this limit perfectly. The level design full of vegetation and the new over-the-shoulder camera trick the player perception, making it look like the environment is bigger, and there are a lot of details that participate in creating the illusion. Examples of these are the characters giving you directions despite them being always the same.
Eva said it was to the north, so head that way.
On letting you view Grasnygrad from a distance and displaying how huge the place is before you go there, so while you play in that restricted area, you still have that image in your mind. Not to mention that thanks to the gameplay structure based on the survival concept, where you can either be the hunter or the one being hunted, the map being small is the least of your concerns. The same, however, can't really be said for Snake Eater's sequel, Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, where the environment's limits can be felt a lot. And that's because it was released for the even more limited PlayStation Portable. Metal Gear had already developed 2 spin-offs for this console, and because it couldn't recreate the same experience of home console titles, they had indeed introduced a new interesting game with stealth elements, but this new entry was a bit more ambitious. It tells Snake's journey after the events of Metal Gear Solid 3, as well as giving more background to well-known characters like Roy Campbell and Frank Yeager. But despite it brings back the same mechanics, the game limits led to even smaller and monotonous environments and forced the gameplay in being divided in episodic missions. So for as much as they made it look like it just couldn't have been the same. But to make up for this, a new important feature was introduced in the gameplay, which also perfectly matches with Big Boss's character arc, as he begins his journey in building Outer Heaven. Of course, I'm talking about the recruitment system. For the first time, you are given the possibility to kidnap enemy soldiers and make them work for you by placing them in different units according to their skills. Having soldiers placed in those units affects various aspects of the gameplay. They make it possible to play with characters other than Snake, develop equipment, receive reports on what can be found in certain stages, or reduce the times the stealth and stamina bar takes to refill. So because the gameplay couldn't really be like the one in Snake Eater, the game lets the player focus more on management and compensates the mission shortness by allowing to make preparations for them. There was also another change due to the PlayStation Portable limit that I think ended up in a very positive result: the use of semi-animated comic-style cutscenes. And I admit that the first time I saw them, I was so enthusiastic about it. They were even fully voiced by the original cast. It was just so cool to see the familiar characters with a different style, and I think this really made the game stand out among all the other ones. Besides, if I hadn't read that Kojima only took the role of producer for this project, I could have easily believed that he was the one who wrote and directed it. Portable Ops really is an impressive game, and it definitely deserves its place in the canon timeline. But before continuing Big Boss's journey, the fans were still eager to know what happened after the events of Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty, despite the end was purposely left open for the players to interpret it. The demand of a sequel directed by Kojima was so bad that he was basically forced to direct the new entry Metal Gear Solid 4: Guns of the Patriots, released in 2008 exclusively for PlayStation 3. The game director was supposed to be Shuyo Murata, who had already worked and contributed to the story of the Metal Gear games before, but this led some fans to even threat Kojima's life for him to be the director. And make it make sense here, because how can you get a game by killing the game director you want for the game? I don't know, maybe they thought he could reappear as the sword with the answers to all their questions. But anyway, there is a lot to say about Metal Gear Solid 4, because I think its limits weren't represented by the hardware and not even by the deadlines. Instead, I think the limits Guns of the Patriots had to deal with were due to the very fact that it is a video game. I do think that in this case, the medium they chose to tell this story represented a limit for it, and we'll see together why in part 2. I'm the one leaving you with a cliffhanger now. But yes, it's enough for today, so at this point, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments what you think, if you agree or disagree with what I said, or if there's something in particular you'd like to mention. For more content, you can come see my live streams on Twitch every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, and follow me on other socials, all the links are in the description. Thank you again and see you next time in part 2. Bye!